BBC News.
And now on BBC Radio 4, it's time for Any Questions. In the chair is Jonathan Dimbleby.
Welcome to North Yorkshire, to the banks of the River Tees and to Middlesbrough, which was built in the 19th century on the coal industry. Today, 3 miles downstream, its port, Teesport, is still the third largest in the United Kingdom by one of the key measures, handling principally now steel and chemicals. We are in the fine Victorian Town Hall, which is built on a magnificent scale. Among others, Rachmaninoff, Johann Strauss and Elgar performed here, and later Oasis, David Bowie, The Clash and Robbie Williams. We are here in part to mark the reopening of the hall following a £7.7 million refurbishment programme financed jointly by the Council and the Heritage Lottery Fund. And strutting their stuff in our show, Anna Soubry went to a comprehensive school in Worksop. Trained as a barrister, she later joined ITV as a reporter and presenter before her election to Parliament. A former business minister, she's among other things a passionate advocate for women's rights. Caroline Flint, former Europe minister, who resigned from Gordon Brown's government, accusing the Prime Minister of using women as window dressing. She returned as a shadow cabinet minister under Ed Miliband, but left again when Jeremy Corbyn was elected as Labour leader. Tim Roach is the son of a dock worker and shop steward. He started his career in the post room of the GMB and is now General Secretary of what is the third largest union in the UK with more than 630,000 members. Gerard Batten grew up on the Isle of Dogs and was a founding member of UKIP. Now, 25 years on and 12 leaders later, that's if you exclude one of the leaders who served twice and almost 3 times, he is in that role, as well as being one of the 15 UKIP members of the European Parliament. Our panel. And our first question, please.
Craig Chapman. Was Lord Peter Hain's use of parliamentary privilege a flagrant disregard for due process of an important stand against white male privilege?
Caroline Flint.
I think every parliamentarian, in whether it's the House of Commons or House of Lords, takes using parliamentary privilege very seriously. That's why you don't hear it every day happening. But I think on this occasion, Peter was absolutely right. There should be no way in which people can use non-disclosure agreements when there are allegations of racism, sexual harassment. I just think that is unacceptable. There is a place sometimes for confidentiality agreements, usually when people are leaving a big company so they don't share internal company secrets. But on this occasion, that is not right. And it does seem to me that too often the most vulnerable in our workplaces are left without any resource to public funds, any resource to support, unless if they happen to be in a trade union, to actually fight their corner, whereas the rich always seem to get their way. So Peter was right.
The case relates, of course, as we now know, to Sir Philip Green, who had taken out an injunction against the Daily Telegraph. This is how the story came to prominence. And he's accused of sexual and racial harassment and vehemently denies doing anything that could be regarded as illegal. Anna Soubry.
I agree absolutely with Caroline when she talks about these non-disclosure agreements, these NDAs. In some instances, absolutely right. There is real concern, though, that in too many instances, you frankly have a party, which can usually be an individual who may have been the subject of horrific sexual harassment, normally at work, who frankly has been through the trauma of that, and then the prospect of taking a powerful, extremely well-resourced employer or any other organisation through the legal process actually just adds to the trauma. And whilst they may be legally represented, there is real concern that, frankly, stuff that should be in the public domain, should be properly dealt with, is in effect covered up because, truthfully, that person just can't take any more. So they will just agree to it and they'll take a little bit of money and they'll sign this NDA. Where I do disagree, though, with Caroline, though she makes a good point about the importance of using parliamentary privilege properly. I think in this instance, Lord Haynes got it wrong. I think he should have waited, if he'd even needed to wait, because I do trust our judges, and this matter had been to court. It's interesting that 2 of the 5, I'm going to call them complainants, but the other party, had backed the application for an injunction until the trial was expedited, and it was going to be heard in January, and I think it could have waited until then. If, for some reason, the court had then agreed to the injunction remaining, I can understand that it might have had a more valid point, but I think he jumped far too soon, and I think that was a poor use, in this instance, of parliamentary privilege, because it is a gift and it's to be used as sparingly as possible.
Do you go as far as the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, widely respected in that role, when he pointed out that the injunction was an interim injunction, sort of point you've been making, and that it was an arrogant decision that had absolutely no regard for judicial process or the rule of law?
I suspect that Dominic is right. In my experience, he usually is right. And it's just that in this instance, there was going to be a trial in January, and so I just think he acted too quickly. I think he should have waited, if indeed he'd needed to wait, because that trial would have taken place.
Gerard Batten.
I think it's a strange way to pose the question. Have I got it right, an attack on white privilege? I don't see what it's got to do with Mr. Philip Green's colour. What it's got to do is whether it was a misuse of parliamentary privilege and whether it's appropriate to have these non-disclosure agreements. Now, was it a misuse of privilege? I think it was, because it should be reserved for things where an MP or a Lord think that really is something that should be in the public domain, which is not in the public domain and is being prevented from being in the public domain that ought to be there. We hear that that there's a trial coming up in January, so there may be reporting restrictions on the trial. There sometimes are, as we famously know, and which a judge will decide whether that's appropriate or not. There are also this case of non-disclosure agreements. Now, Mr. Green has vehemently denied that he has done anything that's unlawful. It's quite often practiced when employees leave companies that they sign non-disclosure agreements which are legally binding. And we all know, for example, when the press libels somebody, they often settle out of court, and there is a non-disclosure clause on how much money that person's actually got in order to not encourage other people to take newspapers to court. So I think that there's 2 issues there. Was the privilege misused? I tend to think it was. Is it appropriate that there are non-disclosure agreements? Well, if it's a contract between 2 people and are both happy with that and money is exchanged hands, then that contract should be observed by both parties. This looks like it's going to result in some kind of a trial, and then it's appropriate for the judge or not to say whether there should be reporting restrictions. And, of course, most trials are reported in the press.
Tim Roach.
Firstly, I'm astonished at what I'm hearing. I was around back in the day when non-disclosure agreements were first devised, and the reason they were devised was if some person left one company and went to work for another or set up their own company, that they weren't able to take existing customers with them or weren't able to divulge secrets. Now what we're talking about is something completely different. And to hear Gerard saying that there will be reporting restrictions in the trial, well, are UKIP going to adhere to those reporting restrictions then, or for your own publicity you're going to stand there and potentially collapse the whole trial for your own publicity? Secondly,
we've never thwarted reporting restrictions, so I don't know why.
Say that again, sorry.
UKIP has never thwarted reporting restrictions.
Well, many people you court have, and maybe we'll get into that in a bit. But secondly, this nonsense about it was an interim injunction. The people that I work with, the people that I represent, the people the GMB union represents don't even understand what an interim injunction is. What they do understand is that when they are wronged, whether they're sexually abused, sexually harassed, whether they're bullied, they have the right to justice. And when they go to court and take the massive step of taking this to court, they think justice should apply. What they don't expect in Britain in 2018 is that someone who is wealthy enough to spend £500,000 to protect their identity at the expense and at the cost of the victim should be able to remain anonymous. So, of course, on this occasion, because it is in the public interest, Peter Hain was right to do it. But there's a wider issue here, Jonathan. The people I represent day in, day out, when they are abused sexually or racially, are often offered large sums of money to keep their counsel, to keep quiet, buying their silence. That cannot continue. That cannot be right. We have to face this up and we have to confront it.
Hear, hear.
I agree. I think Tim again, I absolutely do agree with you about NDAs and the misuse of them, especially to silence clear victims of sexual harassment, bullying at work, racial discrimination. I completely agree with you. I think it's the old lawyer in me, being a purist, if you like, on whether Peter should have disclosed it in the way that he did or whether he should have waited till January. And I just think in this instance he should have waited.
Yes,
That's
on
all
that
the
point,
that's our only difference. That's all.
Caroline, as a parliamentarian, do you accept the distinction between the need to change NDAs or to regard them as outrageously misused in some cases, and when the judges have made an interim decision, 3 senior judges, that the judges should have precedence over Parliament?
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer. I think, and that this is the Labour Party's view as well, that when it comes to NDAs being used to cover up allegations of racism or sexism, they should be banned. It just shouldn't happen. It shouldn't apply in those situations, full stop. But, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I think part of the job of Parliament is, dare I say it, to speak truth to power. Yeah. And on occasions, it's really important that Parliament speaks up. I remember not so long ago, I certainly was vocal, other people were vocal, about the fact that War Boys, the serial rapist, was let out even though the parole board decided to think that was the right thing to do. And I remember at the time, Jonathan, people saying, but this is the parole board, they have to do this process. They're following the book, they're doing all this. Who are you as a politician to question why this man is being let out? Even though there were hundreds of women who didn't press their charges because they were assured he would stay inside for a very long, long time. So sometimes it's a difficult call and there's a balance to be struck, but sometimes I think poking the establishment is a worthwhile thing to do. And I'm very proud that in 2016, even though it was just a symbolic vote, I voted along with every other Labour MP to get this guy's knighthood off him, and it's a disgrace that he's still wandering around with one.
Perhaps I should say that relates entirely to his professional activities as the boss of a company that people...
Which he sold for £1 and left people without their pensions.
Yeah. That's all I need to say. It's distinct from this.
He's odious. There is no doubt about it, and that's me being generous.
But I'm just trying to make a distinction, as I have to do, between that and any linkage to this injunction.
just for his behaviour with BHS, as Caroline says.
A couple of tweets on this. Why does the law allow rich individuals to secure personal protection via NDAs that may prevent or defer future criminal investigations into serious allegations? In this instance, does the phrase "the law is an ass" apply far too easily? And then this is a very important stand. The rich must not be able to gag a free press to prevent scrutiny that was absolutely of public interest. Any answers may well be for you after the Saturday broadcast of this question. If so, Anita Anand will be waiting for your calls on 03 700 100 444. The email is any.answers@bbc.co.uk, and tweet, as some of you have been doing, #BBCAQ. We'll go to our next.
Catherine Elliott. With talk of knives and nooses in the UK and actual pipe bombs in the US, how important is the tone of political discourse? Have we forgotten already the outcry after the murder of Joe Cox?
Anna Soubry.
Well, it's appalling, isn't it, the state that our country has got itself into and the state of politics and the language that's used. I'm not alone in having had death threats. 3 people have received custodial sentences because of the death threats to me and my staff, because of my views on Brexit. Even my own mother, my 85-year-old mother, received an anonymous letter threatening her safety and well-being because of my views on Brexit. What a sad, shabby state we have got ourselves in, and it is simply, absolutely unacceptable. And the language used by some of my colleagues, I am frankly horrified and ashamed of them. They should not have done it. about anybody. It's not a matter of it being the party leader. Politicians, in fact, all of us, have an absolute responsibility in the language that we use. And I'm afraid we've almost fallen into a cesspit. And the sooner we get out of it, the better.
Do you think,
because
Anna,
we are not serving anybody properly.
do you think that individual or those individuals who said those things, and apparently everyone is said to know who they are, should be named and shamed, and if they have committed or been liable to have been committing a criminal offence, should be brought to book?
Oh, this most certainly should be brought to book, and those people that do know their names, I genuinely don't. I mean, there's lots of rumour, but I don't know. But if, people that do know, then yes, they most certainly should report that to the Chief Whip, and he should take the appropriate action to discipline them. This is not acceptable, and the questioner was absolutely right when she talked about Joe Cox. And it's as if Joe's murder almost never happened. And I also have to say, the Leader of the Opposition talked about a kinder politics. And I have to say, I wish his supporters also practised a kinder politics, most notably to a number of women Labour MPs, and I now call them colleagues, who suffer the most appalling abuse from the hard left. At least for someone like me, I get it from both ends. Actually, can I be just quite serious about something? I'm slightly I'm quite frivolous about it. Somebody from a newspaper rang me up to tell me about language that was being posted by members of UKIP and others on my Facebook or another Facebook or whatever. And it was appalling language describing me because of my views on Brexit. And when they told me the words that were used, the expressions, I said, really? God, I've been called far worse than that. And that reporter, quite properly, was horrified. She brought me, and I've discussed this with a number of my colleagues, that we are so used to it now. Unfortunately, it's like water off a duck's back. Again, that can't be right. Let's just all be a bit more civilised and kinder to each other.
UKIP leader Gerard Batten.
Well, when I got involved in politics back in 1992-93, and I was the organiser for the first European elections that UKIP fought in 1994, and I scraped together the money to do a leaflet for all our candidates, and I put it out, and the next morning the phone went, and I thought, fantastic, somebody's responding, and it was a death threat. So the first call I ever got was a death threat. I didn't take it very seriously, I have to say. Since then, I've had bricks put through my window about 3 times, or attempted to do it 3 times anyway. I've got toughened glass now, so please don't bother. That's the kind of thing that disturbs me, those kind of physical attacks and intimidation. I think that politics has always been robust in this country. It's always been adversarial. That's why we have the House of Commons laid out the way it is. But that robustness should always be used in talking about policies and ideas and people's stances on particular ideas and policies, and it shouldn't descend into the purely personal. Although, having said that, there will always be a bit of banter in politics because that's the way it is. But I agree that we should actually try to keep that within civilised bounds. What I think is really worrying is the intimidation and threats that come from the extreme left. For example, back in May, there was a parliamentary by-election in Lewisham East, and a hustings meeting had to be shut down because members of the extreme left, representatives of it, actually intimidated that meeting, and the police closed it down on the basis of public safety. Instead of arresting the people that were intimidating the candidates, they actually closed the meeting down. Now, if you've got democratic meetings being shut down because people are intimidating it, there's something wrong. I had a meeting up in Barrow-in-Furness last week. It had to change venues 3 times because people were threatening the venues themselves. They were going to damage the venues, so they closed the meeting down. And the person who organised that meeting had his car vandalised and was in some fear of what might happen next. I think that is very frightening, and that is coming from the extreme left in this country, not the extreme right.
Mr. Batten, Gerard Batten, do you think that you may, in part, have contributed to the atmosphere of political discourse when you tell the British people, including millions of Muslims, that Islam is a death cult steeped in violence and bloodshed, and that Muhammad was a paedophile who kept sex slaves? Does that help political discourse, do you feel?
That is about ideas and ideology, because you've kind of made my... Will you allow me to finish, please? You've kind of made my point for me, because I'm talking about ideas and ideology, and of course the person I refer to has been dead for 1,400 years, and under English law you can't libel a dead person, although it's true in actual fact.
Absolute rubbish. There's a very good example of what's happened to British politics. It is deeply offensive, and that's why you said it. Anyway, I'm delighted to hear that you are now going to condemn the appalling use of language by your UKIP members against members of Parliament like me and many others in this Brexit debate. So thank you for condemning that, and I'm looking forward to it stopping.
Tim Roach.
What we've certainly seen is a rise in social media, particularly of some really disgraceful and disgusting comments that people think they can sit behind the keyboard and just say with impunity. And I've experienced lots of that myself, and I will always defend myself and of course, my GMB union. But we've also seen it in the media, and we're seeing it in politics. And I have great respect and admiration for my fellow politicians of whatever party or persuasion. And only at the weekend I saw some of the stuff that Theresa May had to endure. And I don't agree with very much, if anything, that Theresa May says. But to be told that bring your own noose or you're coming to face the swords is frankly disgraceful and disgusting. But then to hear Gerard Batten start to blame the extreme left because someone has the threat of their car being vandalised...
It wasn't a threat, it happened.
Well, OK, the reality of someone's car being vandalised, when you flip it to say that what the extreme left want you to believe, that if Muslim people or Islam, a few people create a heinous crime like child grooming that we would absolutely deplore, condemn, these people should be locked away, throw away the key, that therefore you blame the whole race, the whole religion, is absolutely disgusting and disgraceful. What about where I live? Where I live in Leeds, Jimmy Savile, he could, just before all these disgraceful allegations that were found to be true, he could have ended up the mayor of Leeds, for goodness sake. What about Rolf Harris? Do we say all white Australian people should be castigated or paedophiles? And where also is Tory Minister Sajid Javid? Because when the Huddersfield issue came out, he was saying these Asian paedophiles. There was a fella, Wayne Wright, just up the road in Hartlepool in July this year, convicted of exactly the same offence. Did he say white British people are paedophiles as well? It's disgraceful. Let's get some honesty. Let's get some continuity.
Well, first of all, you've kind of said it doesn't matter that somebody's property is damaged. And secondly, I haven't done the things you've accused me of, but obviously you're looking for every opportunity to attack me, but you at least get your facts right.
Gerard, I won't attack you, mate. I'll attack your party, I'll attack everything you stand for, and I'll attack Tommy Robinson, the person who you want to goose-step towards UKIP and change the rules to their party.
But you won't condemn the extreme left that shut down meetings. Will you do that?
Well, let's all of us...
Mate, I'd settle for shut down meetings rather than try and shut down whole communities, whole religions and whole races and putting them one against each other.
It's OK to shut down democratic meetings.
For those...
Both extremes are wrong and should both grow up and use proper, decent language. Disgraceful.
For those who may not be familiar, your position, as I understand it, Gerard Batten, is that despite former leader Nigel Farage saying it's a great mistake because he's unacceptable, you would like your party colleagues to accept Tommy Robinson as a member of your party.
I have said my personal opinion.
You regard him as a hero, I think.
I have said that my personal opinion is that I would like him to become a member of the party, but that will be a decision of the members of the party, because if that happens under my leadership, that would go to a ballot of all the party members for them to decide.
Why do you regard him?
I think what he actually said, Jonathan, was that he was prepared to change the rules to get Tommy Robinson out.
No,
be careful what you wish for, mate. If you get him in there, bearing in mind UKIP is in the gutter where you belong to be, he may well be the next leader on your merry-go-round of leaders, mate.
Getting your facts wrong again. In your eagerness to attack, you're not getting the facts right. Under our constitution, we have a proscription
I
on
honestly
certain
don't know your
parties,
constitution.
which your party, the Labour Party, doesn't have, the Tories don't have, that we do, but we also have a provision that that rule can be waived if that is the decision of the party.
No,
Can I just ask this one more question before I bring in Caroline, who's been patiently waiting? If I'm right, you're certainly reported as saying, and I think you did, that Tommy Robinson is a hero. I was just curious to know why you regard him as a hero. And you sort of likened him in some ways, despite breaking the law, to Gandhi and Mandela and the suffragettes.
Well, yes, because all of those people technically broke the law in their own time. They were all convicted criminals. And I think that what Tommy Robinson does as standing up for the victims of industrialised sexual abuse in this country is a heroic thing.
Caroline Flint, back to the question. Have we forgotten the outcry after Joe Cox?
I will answer the question, but I'll just say this. Mr Batten, you seem to have an aspiration for UKIP to become the modern-day BNP National Front.
Absolutely right.
You've got some of their, you have got some of their members as councillors in your party, so you're keener on them than we are.
You're a disgrace. Right, so I would say this. My grandma had a saying, and she said it to me and my brother and my sister when we were little: 2 wrongs don't make a right. And to be honest, I don't care where the abuse is coming from, whichever, if you like, wing of politics, or whether you're not involved in politics at all. But in a democracy, we should be able to have a reasonable debate without recourse to insults, threats. And just to share with you, last night, yesterday, I received a tweet which, because I accept the referendum result, I campaign for Remain, I accept the referendum result, I want us to get a deal, I don't want us to crash out without a deal, because I think it would be absolutely a catastrophe for jobs in Middlesbrough and elsewhere. I received a tweet saying, next year you'll be hanging from a rope.
Oh, dear God. It's disgraceful.
Do you think, Caroline, that the language used by politicians, and we know that another politician used this term, noose, hanging for a rope, that there's a symbiosis between the extreme things that are said on social media, and the politicians work with that and become like the most extreme voices on social media if they're not careful. They feed off each other.
Well, I think there's seems to be happening, and social media is part of this, is just a lack of responsibility, in an anonymity, I think, in terms of where people think they can get away with things. But that certainly, Jonathan, is not helped by the language that politicians use. But unfortunately, in this Brexit debate, I feel like I am literally piggy in the middle between hardline Brexiteers on one side and hardline Remainers on the other. And
pause
on
that.
I'm not going to go into the whole, but the problem is, you know, we are not having a reasonable debate that can heal some of the divisions and bring the country together. And nobody wants to listen on those extremes of this debate. And it is undermining our ability of a country to move forward, to heal divisions and get the best deal possible. And that, for me, is an absolutely crying shame.
A chance now, on that issue, to have a discussion that may or may not be illuminating. Mick Thompson.
Thank you. Mick Thompson, what is more important, a good trade deal with the EU or honouring the referendum result?
As the timetable noose tightens, Gerard Batten.
Well, first of all, the two are not dependent upon each other. Leaving the European Union is leaving the European Union. We've had 2.5 years, really, of talking or hearing the government and the Remainers talk a complete load of nonsense about our exit from the European Union. We don't need a trade deal to leave the European Union. What we should have done immediately after the referendum is to have repealed the 1972 European Communities Act as a first step and not a last step. All EU law would have stayed in place because it's all been incorporated by Acts of Parliament and by other means, so chaos would not have ensued. But the government could have then gone to the European Union and said, this is how we intend to leave, and we wish to do it in a friendly and cooperative manner. And the first thing that they could have done would have been to say, you can have a continued tariff-free trade deal because you can have the freedom of movement of goods, services and capital. You can't have people. The EU currently has, last time I checked, about 58 different trade agreements with countries around the world. None of them include the free movement of people, so it would have been relatively easy to actually come up with a continued tariff-free trade deal, if that's what the European Union wanted. We could have said to them, this is what we're offering. If you don't want it, we can go on to WTO terms and be like every other country in the world.
And would you now, Mr Batten, want straight to WTO terms, given where
I think the
United Kingdom is in this
time,
negotiation?
I think we should have already reached a withdrawal agreement by mid-October anyway, because that's precisely what the European Parliament Constitutional Affairs Committee said, a year or two ago. We need, by this point in time, to have arrived at an agreement because they have to plan the next European elections. It's a bit late now, so I think we probably should go on to WTO terms. And you have to remember, of the 190-odd countries in the world, only 27 countries are members of the European Union, apart from us. Now, all those other countries trade with the European Union. You do not need trade deals to trade. The 10 biggest trading partners of the European Union don't have trade deals. I think Japan may have recently negotiated one. But they export billions of pounds worth of goods without a trade deal. This whole thing is a complete red herring.
OK, thank you. Tim Roach, a good trade deal with the EU or honouring, asks Mick Thompson, the referendum result?
First of all, yes, the GMB is absolutely clear on this. First of all, we've had the referendum. We are coming out of the European Union. But the terms on which we leave the European Union are as important as the terms as the decision in the first place to come out of Europe. Now, the reason I'm stumbling over my words, I'm still staggered by what Gerard has just said about World Trade Organization departure. Does he absolutely understand? I've always thought UKIP are bonkers. I didn't realise they were absolutely clueless about trade and about manufacturing and about jobs and about working people and about rights. And he's clearly clueless. Now, you can't come up with a solution, Jonathan, until you come up with why we got here in the first place. Now, the further away from London you get, and London is a rich multicultural society of which I work during the week and I'm very proud to be, the further, whether you go southwest or whether you go north, the people where I live and where I worked for 10 years in Yorkshire, where I worked for 23 years in Nottinghamshire before that, they don't see that rich multicultural society and diversity and the strength of it. What they see is the closure of pit communities. What they see is the closure of woolen communities. What people around here see is the closure of Redcar, the steelworks. And you know what happened after that? No one listened. New Labour didn't listen back in the day, the Conservative government don't listen now, and those communities have been left to rot. And they see politicians on the telly that don't look like them, don't experience the experiences that we've had, they don't sound like them. And therefore, when it came to the 2016 referendum decision, they felt we might as well bring the bloody lot down because there's nothing in it for us as a status quo. Now, the reality is that under Brexit, we have an opportunity. And the GMB Union isn't going to politically point score here. If Theresa May can genuinely come back with a deal that delivers for all parts of the United Kingdom, that safeguards jobs, that safeguards workers' rights, that will keep up with those rights in Europe, that is an end to austerity. Yes, the £350 million a week into the NHS, let's see that, but let's see a lot more investment into the working people that I represent who literally can't make ends meet, that is part of a customs union, that is part of a single market. Then the GMB will vote to say yes. But ultimately, Jonathan, I must finish on this point, it's the people who said we're coming out of the European Union. It's the people who should decide whether the terms are acceptable or not.
So if Theresa May comes back with a deal that does not include what you've just described, membership of the single market and inside the customs union, but something short of that, and as a result, you call for a people's vote, which is what your position would be if it came to that, and the people that you so powerfully described continue to say, as it were, up yours, that would be a price worth paying rather than something closer, from your perspective, to the EU than simple Brexit?
I think, first of all, Brexit has never been seen as an opportunity to make the UK what it could possibly be. As I say, the people have spoken. We're coming out of the European Union. The GMB has no... What do we have? Best of 3, best of 5? Ask them again until you come up with the answer. I'm absolutely clear on that. But in answer to your
You want to ask them again. You want to ask them again.
No, I don't want to ask them again. We're coming out of the European Union. That's why the GMB's position is not for a people's vote, Jonathan. It's for a public vote on the final deal. As a trade union negotiator of 40 years, when my members say to me, go and negotiate me a pay deal, Tim, I go away, I negotiate the very best deal I can, I come back to those people and they say whether it's acceptable or not.
So
if it's not acceptable,
what is a public vote apart from an
public
election?
vote is on the terms of the deal, not... Remain shouldn't, in my opinion, be on the ballot paper. We've had that decision. But I'll tell you this, if, as a result of coming out of the European Union, it doesn't address inequality, it doesn't address austerity, it doesn't address this unfairness, that people voted to bring down the whole system, then we will have wholesale civil unrest.
Caroline Flint.
Well, there's going to be...
Which is better, just to remind ourselves of the question?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's either or. I think we can leave the European Union, but I think it's vitally important in doing so we have a deal that deals with some of the concerns about trade. And just to quote from the Chief Executive of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, we're 186,000 jobs in the car industry. We need a deal. If we have no deal, there is no transition, there is no implementation period that could kick in. And it's only a short while ago, it seems, that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, was against even having a transition period, and I think Labour did a lot to push her in the right direction. But it has been shambolic. What we will have before Christmas is potentially a vote on the headlines, the divorce arrangements. So it will be about the amount of money that we owe, that we're accountable for in an honourable way to pay back. It'll be about, for example, rights for EU nationals who are here and hopefully for Brits who are living in other parts of the EU. And it will be those sort of headline arrangements. The transition period is going to deal in more detail about issues around trade and security and institutions that we might still want to be part of. And that's important because then we're going to have a bigger, more detailed association agreement which will tie all those things together.
You left out one, which has to be in the withdrawal agreement, which is the backstop for Northern Ireland.
Sorry. On that point, if the Prime Minister comes back with a deal, of course it has to come back with the full agreement of the other 27 members of the EU, and that of course includes the Republic of Ireland. Now I haven't got a crystal ball to say what that deal would be, but I very much hope that despite the shambolic nature of the discussions over the last 2 years and the infighting on the Tory side, it's been absolutely exhausting and frustrating to say the least, that there is still the possibility of a deal will come back. And if a deal comes back supported by the 27, I think we have to look at that deal, like Tim says, because I think to just rule it out of hand that whatever deal comes back isn't worth looking at is the wrong thing. And that
so you would be ready to disobey, if it came to that, your party's whip in the House of Commons and vote with the Prime Minister, with the Conservatives, against the stand of Labour?
I'm not going to hear, in the absence of seeing something in front of me, say that, oh yes, you know what, you've got my vote. But I'm encouraged by what both Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn have said to me when I've had discussions with them just this week, which is actually, if a deal comes back that actually encompasses a lot of what Tim said, and our 6 tests, that has a customs arrangement as close to the single market as possible, but my party does believe freedom of movement has to change, then that's worth looking at. And the biggest disappointment to me is that after the referendum, when Theresa May became Prime Minister, she didn't actually reach out to have cross-party support to get through this process. And I think over a year and a half ago now, I in one contribution said, why don't you invite someone to come from Labour's team and be on the negotiating group? And that was a mistake, because she's been in hots to the extreme side of her party for the last 2 years.
Anna Soubry.
I think everybody, if I may say, we all agree that we have a government that believes Brexit means Brexit. So we've got a government that is absolutely resolute about delivering on the referendum. On their own impact assessments, whichever way you cut it, whatever deal we get, we are going not to be as prosperous as we are at the moment with the current deal as a member of the European Union. So that is... No, sorry, the government... Well, hang on, don't just bellow rubbish, sir. Come with me and we'll go through... Hang on. We will go through the government's own impact assessments that show that whatever deal we get, our future prosperity will be reduced. That's from a Brexit-supporting government and civil servants who do their job with great authority, with great expertise and total impartiality.
But
so for the first time...
Anna, that is...
For the first time...
Let us assume, for the purposes of this, let's assume that that is correct. The people, as was described so potently just now by Tim Roach, voted for Brexit, to leave. You would have them change their minds, would you not?
No, that is up to the people. What I would say, though, is this. People were promised a trade deal. Do you remember? You were promised that when we left the European Union, not only would you get £350 million more a week for the NHS, you would get a trade deal. And indeed, you were told it was going to be the easiest trade deal in the history of trade deals. You were told we were going to be better. The Prime Minister said we were going to have an implementation period of that trade deal. We are not, after 2.5 years, going to get a trade deal. So British business will not have the one thing that they need to provide prosperity and jobs, and that is certainty. And we will leave next March not knowing where our final destination will be. And it is easy for people like me, of my age, to sit and pontificate about things that will not affect me and my generation. We have to put our country, our children and our grandchildren first and say, we have made a dreadful mistake. Let's put it back to the people with a people's vote.
Several listeners will want to come in on this without any questions, as our audience would like to do. Any answers? Anita Anand, 03700 100 444. We've got at least two panelists who want to come in again, but I'm going to get to our next question, I'm afraid.
Hello, my name's Ken Dixon, and I'm a very proud Yorkshireman and Northerner. This question is, people deny that there is a north-south divide. So why are they spending billions on a new underground line, sewage system, and a railway infrastructure down in London, yet they couldn't afford to pledge $600 million to save SSI? I can't remember who the minister was.
The SSI was, for those who don't know it only too well here, was the steelworks that closed in 2015 with the loss of 2,200 jobs. This huge distinction, which Ken Dixon points out, I think it's 15 billion or so on Crossrail, 4.5 billion upgrading the sewage works, but why can't they afford 600 million? Anna Soubry.
Yes, I was the Steel Minister, as the questioner rightly identifies, when SSI closed in Redcar. Look, I'm an East Midlander, born and bred. There's a lot of truth about what you say about the inequalities of investment across the country, and I think that in the creation of the Northern Powerhouse under George Osborne, I believe that the Conservatives have actually done an extremely good job at redressing that balance. I'm a great supporter of HS2, which will absolutely deliver that sort of infrastructure and investment that we need, certainly in parts of the country which I come from, and I have the good fortune to have the East Midlands hub in my constituency at Towton. I'm very happy to talk to you, sir, after the programme about why SSI closed. It wasn't closed down by the government. You're right that it would have been, there was an argument that it could have been kept open if the government was to be giving £500 million to keep it open. But the simple truth of it was, as you and I know, it was losing millions and millions of pounds. And the steel market and that particular type of steel had changed considerably, and it was with huge regret that there was nothing that could be done to save it. But we put in many tens of millions of pounds to ensure that those men, and they were mainly men, especially the apprentices, got good jobs as a result of it.
I'm afraid we've only got a minute per head for the rest of this discussion. Tim Roach.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, the North-South divide, I remember I lived and worked in Yorkshire at the time when George Osborne coined this phrase of the Northern Powerhouse, and I said at the time, you will not get a Northern Powerhouse without proper funding. And the reality is that when SSI closed, and Anna, you've honestly said you were a minister, the Tories were absolutely nowhere. They were nowhere then for the people in this community, for the people in this audience, and they're nowhere now. They haven't listened to the people. They haven't listened to the North. They've never invested in the North. And frankly, if this were happening down in the south or in Surrey, why is it that local authorities in the south, in Surrey, the leafy suburbs, haven't had the cuts that local authorities in the north have had, left, right and centre. That's a disgrace.
That's simply not true.
Caroline Flint.
Investment in London is 2.5 times that comes in the north. And when it comes to this area in Redcar, the coke ovens, which could have actually been kept and mothballed for a better day, were closed. It would cost something like £1 to £3 billion to reopen them. But the fact is, under, I'm afraid, you, Anna, and your government, regardless of the European Union, we've had austerity. And I think at the time you were blaming the European Union for the problems in this area and its impact on steel, because your government wouldn't do what the Germans and the French do every single day.
Gerard Batten, just 45 seconds, Gerard Batten. Gerard?
Well, first of all, the reason that a lot of money is spent in my constituency in London is because the population is rapidly expanding. It's now up to about 8.5 million. There'll probably be another 1 million people over the next 10 years coming into London, so this money has to be spent. But the good news is we can save money elsewhere to spend it on revitalising the north of England. You could save an enormous amount of money by not spending up to 90, 100 billion on HS2, a complete waste of money. We can save 10 to 12 to 14 billion every year by not giving it to the European Union. Let's invest it in the north of England. And then we can spend that money on infrastructure, transport, upgrading the railways we do have, and actually helping industry to come back to the north of England. And I would have not spent the last 26 years of my life trying to get out of the European Union if I didn't think it was going to make us more prosperous and better off. And by the way, if we stay in the customs union, we haven't left.
A very quick response
very
to that.
I was the first Conservative minister, I think, ever to instruct the officials to vote for tariffs on steel to protect the steel industry, which we did, because Scunthorpe remained open and we saved Port Talbot. I'm sorry about what happened in Redcar, but unfortunately it was losing millions and millions of pounds in a declining market.
Any answers? 03700 100 444. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, for this week. Next week, Nicky Morgan will be with us, Annalise Dodds, Labour MP, Sammy Wilson from the DUP, and an academics and math teacher, the academics and math teacher and communicator, Bobby Seagull. Join us there from Middlesbrough Town Hall, the splendour of Middlesbrough Town Hall in Middlesbrough. Goodbye.